Hi, this is Celeste Taylor, and you found yourself in the Gay Teachers Lounge. Whether you're riding your bike, driving along a scenic highway, or on an airplane 30,000 feet in the air, I'm so happy you're here, and I hope you get a few takeaways. Ring, ring! Class is out. So grab your favorite beverage and get comfy with us because you belong in the lounge. Today's guest brings over 2 decades of experience teaching high school English language arts, stepping into the classroom for the first time in 2003 and staying ever since, not just as an educator, but as a steady, thoughtful presence for generations of students navigating their own identities. He's out in every part of his life, in his classroom, on campus, and beyond. But what makes his perspective especially compelling is the way he approaches that openness with intention. He thinks about what students need from him, where the line is between honesty and overexposure, and how to model authenticity without making himself the center of the story. As culture within student groups is shifting and traditional spaces like GSAs don't always hold the same meaning they once did, he's noticing real generational changes and asking important questions about connection, belonging, and what support actually looks like now. From navigating misconceptions around same-sex prom policies to being one of the first safe adults students come out to wrestling with the balance between advocacy and boundaries, this is another great conversation about what it means to show up as a queer educator today. Welcome to the Gay Teachers Lounge, Sean.
Thank you so much for having me. It all sounds very hearing all that back, it's kind of funny hearing that about myself, but
I get that a lot from my guests, and kudos to you. You are officially the educator I've had on with the most seniority. You have made it 23 years. I guess I should say you've lasted 23 years.
I joke around because actually a few of my former students now are my colleagues, and I tell them all the time, I don't know what exactly happened to me. I was when I had you, I was like the, daring young iconoclast, and now I'm like the elder guard, and it just sort of happened. So yeah, here we are.
That is what happens. I'm so curious, since you have been teaching since the early aughts, what are the biggest changes you've seen these last 23 years in students?
Oh wow. I mean, it's complicated. I think that to me the biggest changes have been, especially in the LGBT plus community, is sort of how students see their place in society, in communities, how they view it. I'll give you an example. We'll start with the prom thing, since it's sort of the thing that resonates most deeply over the course of my career with regard to this particular issue. So early on, I want to say this would have been 2009, 2010. I had a student of mine who had expressed interest in taking his boyfriend to the prom. Now, ever since I had started working since 2003, there had not been a same-sex couple that had gone to the prom together where I worked, which is kind of funny because there was a same-sex couple that went to the prom when I was in high school in the 90s. So
Mm.
I don't know exactly, why, but I really honestly didn't give it too much thought. Communities are different, that the area where I work is a little bit more purple. I didn't really give it too much thought, except that from the time that I started working, there was always this weird rumor that if you wanted to bring a same-sex person to the prom, you had to get some kind of special permission slip signed by your parents. And I thought that was a curiosity. It was a rumor. I never knew it was true, and I never had any kids express interest in going or exploring that avenue. So, and when you're young, you're thinking about other things, getting tenure, lesson plans, all that. So it didn't really cross my mind too much until I had a student say, "Hey, I want to bring my boyfriend to the prom." And I said to him, "I need you to find out for me whether this permission slip thing is true or not, because this is bananas, and I will not allow you to sign a permission slip. I will go to war on this front if they ask you to sign a permission slip, so just but let me know because I don't want to go to war about something that isn't true. And he reported back that it just wasn't true. And so that was really curious to me that for the longest time, this rumor was like part of the fabric. This rumor was part of the fabric of the school. And if the fact that it just wasn't true, and the administration was the same the whole time that I worked there, so it wasn't like a policy had changed or anything. It just wasn't true. And it taught me a pretty important lesson about being careful what your assumptions are
Mm.
about your place in a community and the level of acceptance you'll have in a community because you don't want to like create issues for yourself that simply aren't there, you know?
Right. True.
So fast forward, and I apologize for the length of this story, but it has intergenerational purpose here. Fast forward to about 4 years ago, we're having an open forum on race, gender, and sexuality, and students started talking about all of the ways that they felt unseen or unheard by administration. Now, full disclosure, I'm a pretty active union member as
Mm.
well, and our unions in New York are pretty strong. And so far be it from me to like want to die on the hill of defending administration, but I kind of hit the pause button and said, guys, before you sort of levy these abstract, vague accusations about your support level from administration, do you have any kind of specifics about what they've done in support of you or lack thereof? Have you gone to them with concerns that they've ignored? Can you give me something to go on that, thinking back 18, 17 years earlier, I had the same sort of thoughts and they really couldn't give me any. And so I was really trying to be instructive. I said, let me tell you a story. And I told the whole group, about 100 kids, the story I just told you. And I thought it was really powerful. I thought it was really important that, where kids had thought there was no support from adults around them, there actually was plenty of support.
Mm.
Um, and it was just due to a misconception. And when I was finished, I was feeling really proud of myself, doing something good. And there was kind of this silence and no one really responded. And finally, one student raised his hand and made his way to the front and said, and I quote, because this will live with me forever. He said, I just want to let you know what we say now is same gender relationships, not same sex relationships. And then he sat down. And I was like, okay, so that's what you took out of my story. Okay, I'll meet you where you are linguistically, but there was sort of the lack of willingness to give, I guess, grace with regard to the way people think as opposed to the way people speak. I just was sort of moved at the intergenerational changes, but it just, I guess, the generational difference is that because there is so much, I guess, especially here where I am, there is so much acceptance, there is so normalizing of what had previously been dangerous or transgressive,
Mm.
then the window has shifted as to where students see distance between themselves and others, if that makes sense.
Are you saying that because queerness is pretty normalized in your area of New York, that queer students, they're not feeling supported in certain ways as far as gender is concerned, but then,
I think bigger picture is they take for granted that their relationship would be respected, honored, not trashed, or they wouldn't get beat up or something. When I was in high school, the thought was I wouldn't go to prom with a boy because I would get beat up. They could take for granted all of the, for lack of a better word, acceptance or normalization of everything.
okay,
At the end of the day, subcultures want to, at least on some level, separate and distinguish themselves from the people around them. And they also want to feel, we're adults, they're kids, they have to feel some degree of transgressiveness, some degree of rebellion against adults. That's
mm,
part of the beauty of sort of growing up is seeing the next
mm,
generation tear down what your norms and build up new ones.
mm,
And so I guess the interesting thing for me was I was almost like thrilled in a weird way because they were so safe, I guess, and so accepted in ways they didn't realize that there was this whole new form, a purely linguistic one, in which
okay.
they were feeling separated or oppressed. And my perspective is it is much safer to be linguistically oppressed than it is to be physically oppressed. You know what I'm saying? And
100%.
so there was never a question of danger. There was never a question of, someone getting kicked out of their house or homelessness or, any of those kinds of things that other parts of the country, other parts of the world are obviously very real. One of the things it kind of reinforced for me is actually how safe my students are.
And because they feel so safe and they are taking all this for granted, do you see much higher numbers of queer students in your classes now than, say, even 10 years ago?
That's a tough one. So my knee-jerk reaction, if you could believe it, is actually no.
Mm,
And in at least where I work anyway, I can kind of break down demographically where the different groups go because kids, they click up. That's what they do.
right.
And we have a very, very, not to be too stereotypical, but we have a very robust theater program. And so
Mm,
a lot of LGBT plus kids wind up there. And so that is their, for lack of a better word, safe space. So it's funny because I'm the GSA advisor. And I actually, if you could believe, it's 2026. I have a hard time putting up numbers in GSA because the kids who I get are the ones who don't really fit in with the theater crowd, which is largely its own little world.
hmm
And so I get some of the trans kids, some of the non-binary kids, some of the sort of unsure where they fit into the spectrum of things kids, whereas the traditionally, early identifying gay, lesbian, bisexual kids, they're doing their thing.
mm.
They almost don't need what the GSA provides, if that makes sense, which is on one level heartbreaking to me because I would love like a large group that was all sort of supportive of each other and of all different colors.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's kind of extraordinary that the largest subgroups don't see a need, if that makes sense.
Well, that's what you're saying. I mean, these kids feel plenty safe and supported in their environment, so it would make sense that they don't really need the GSA.
Yeah, but
But
GSA was so, at least when I was growing up and even in college, was so much more than just a place to be safe. It was a, place to meet people, a place
yeah.
to date. I think there's an incredible value in being around people you can tell your inside jokes to, people you can work out your terminology with and work out your the cultural stuff that's very, very inside. I would think I am the only out gay male teacher in the school and yet I am not really treated very differently by the kids. I mean,
Okay.
the ones who need to say something or feel the need to say something will usually make it clear. They find a way to let you know very early on that number one, they know, and number two, they are gay themselves or something. And that's like a thing they do. There never really advances beyond that. There's never really any serious conversations about it. 15 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have kids who were struggling with coming out, and we kind of worked through what those struggles were. And I haven't had a conversation like that in a decade,
Wow.
which is,
Interesting.
yeah,
That is interesting. I'm curious, you been at the same site all 23 years?
I have.
Oh,
Yeah.
good Lord. And so
I have a
what
good gig. Make no mistake, I have a really good gig.
you must have a good gig if you've lasted 23 years. And I was going to ask you your secret to longevity to share with everyone, but automatically having a good gig and liking where you work is number one. And then so I'm presuming you have great colleagues, good admin.
I
Be
have great everything. Good pay, good job security, good
mm,
retirement program, a great community, great classes, stimulating work, and
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I have been out since the beginning.
I was
Um,
going to ask you if you
yeah.
were year one.
I mean, year one, you're a baby. I was a
Yeah.
baby. I started at 23 years old.
Yeah.
I was too worried about me, keeping my head on straight and keeping my job. So New York, but back then
Mm,
we had a 3-year probationary process. So
okay.
you work for 3 years. You have your performance evaluations each year. After the third year, you're granted tenure, and the rule is you can only be dismissed after a due process and then a finding by an arbitrator. So
Okay.
it's almost impossible to
Yeah.
get. You have to be really negligent or abusive or
Yeah.
stealing money. Stealing money
Yeah.
is the fastest way, believe it or not. Yeah, after 3 years, then I could actually breathe, and then my
Mm,
life mattered.
right.
But
You
but yeah,
felt more secure.
yeah, just to hang out socially, going out, introducing people to other people, and
Mm,
that's how it happened, and it was pretty natural and normal. And I got that usual because again, we're in mid-aughts now, so people would say, "Oh, I had no idea," and now I
mm,
know that there's a degree of change as far as what's socially acceptable there.
yeah.
The benefits and drawbacks, and there's a whole politics about this of masking and straight presenting and all that stuff. It was not that I tried to, it's just You are who
Yeah,
you are. And I would hear things like that for the first year or two. And then, yeah, I became friends with these people. And part of I guess, the benefit of working in one place for more than 2 decades is I know these people better than I know members of my family,
I'm sure. Yeah.
My current administrators, most of them were people who I came up with as teachers. I know
Wow.
there are multiple people who I work with who came up as students to the school.
And in 23 years, have you ever had a queer colleague?
So my very dear friend for a while was a lesbian woman. She actually got transferred to a different school. I took over GSA from her.
Oh.
I would just help her throw the pride party and stuff, but she ran it. And then when she transferred schools, then it needed someone. So I
Mm,
took it over. We have one lesbian administrator. We have
okay.
one lesbian school counselor.
Okay.
And I mean, there are people who you say, okay, it's 2026. Perhaps it's okay to come out of the closet, but that's not my business to
Yeah.
advise or speculate. But you think these things. We have a new hire this year who has been
Okay.
out there.
Okay.
I forgot him. I feel bad.
So
We have
many of my guests have forgotten about, oh yeah, there is that
I mean,
other.
to be fair, they say someone has to be working with you for 5 years to really remember them, at least when you've been around a long time.
Okay.
We do have a new hire. Yeah, we do.
That's
Yeah, and
hilarious.
he actually was like from the first day was like my boyfriend this, and I was just like, you gotta just chill a little bit. Not because like it matters that you have a boyfriend, but because kids are wild. They'll start looking you up and online and doing things, and
Yeah.
I've had kids do crazy things because if you do it right, then they find you interesting. And if they find you interesting, their semi-formed brains will do really foolish things in an
Yep.
attempt to get to know you and get to know about you or explore their curiosities. And so, one of the things I had to be and really continue to be very careful about is curating my online presence, for example, and really not having things about myself online.
Yeah.
I don't know what their parents are saying about gay men. There are things that out there in the atmosphere, and so I try and model stability.
I was the same way in my classroom. I was overly cautious with what I ever said. I never talked about my partner. And I would always find it extremely unprofessional when my straight colleagues would talk about, yeah, one did go through a divorce and all of her students knew about it. And mind you, I was an elementary school teacher, not even a high school teacher. And I'm thinking to myself, lady, I don't know why you are telling your business to these 8-year-olds. It's nobody's business. It honestly isn't. And why are you talking about it to your class? Honestly, it's I think when people are in that unstable mental state, they kind of lose it a little bit and then they just want help from whomever. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking to myself, 8-year-olds are not your go-to. And I agree with you with that. I'm curious when you first started, and I know you wanted to get through year 3, obviously, to get your permanent status and tenure. Were you dating at the time or were you single and it wasn't that big of a deal?
I was. So, full disclosure, I came out in 2002 when I graduated college. And there was no reason for that other than that was my personal journey. My parents are wonderful and supportive, and there was never a moment where I felt that I could not speak to them about anything. I am incredibly blessed in that way. So, when I started in the fall of '03, I actually started dating someone in the fall of '03 just by pure coincidence. And that lasted for like 9 years.
Oh, wow.
So it was a brand new, fresh relationship. But the way that worked out was I got my first real job, so I start making actual money. So I
Right.
start going out and throwing it around a little bit, and I'm able to go out every weekend as opposed to never.
Right.
And I was actually dating. And then
Okay.
when that blew up, I really had to do my absolute best to maintain this very, very tough exterior at work. I never let on that I was going through a breakup.
Wow.
That was not
That's
a thing. I would never
big.
in a million years because partly that's just me as a person. I don't want to throw my business around in general, but at work, I really believe that again that modeling that stability is important.
Well, going back to what you were just talking about, especially with your breakup, I think that we as queer educators, and I'll speak for myself, I didn't go through a breakup when I was teaching, but had I most definitely would have kept it hush hush also because I think straight people do look at queer relationships through a colored lens and look down at our relationships. And I think our relationships are often so sexualized that people forget we are human beings in a emotionally intimate relationship with another human being. And when those fail, it's almost as though I would not want to talk about my relationship ending because then my straight colleagues would be like, well, lesbians, they don't, but gay men, I think you have it harder because so often, and especially portrayed in our media, gay male relationships are not portrayed in a emotionally deep, connected way, very sexualized. And so they're thought of, I don't know, I don't know, maybe you have a better understanding of this than I would, but from my perspective, I'm looking at the gay men I've known. And when I do meet gay men who are in long-term relationships, I always think, wow, and why do I say that? Why do I say, wow, good for you? Like it's this unachievable, unattainable thing for gay men to have a long-term relationship. And so I'm not sure if that's been your experience with other people's perceptions.
To be fair, we do inflict much of this upon ourselves, if I may be totally candid. But I mean, that's the kind of thing where there is a media narrative because there was a kernel of reality to this. I mean, at the end of the day, to speak frankly, I mean, the relationship was founded on a sexual basis, and then obviously there's intimacy and emotion and all that. But I think I definitely felt that a little bit. I mean, two of my best buddies at work married their high school sweethearts. It's funny because they will ask me questions like, is this the way it is for you, or was this the way it is for you? And I'm like,
Mm.
you don't want the answer to that. You really don't want that. Be careful what you're asking for because
Ha.
no, it's not. At least it wasn't. So these people sometimes will ask me about my history, my experiences, how I sort of navigate relationships and how I view relationships. And I don't have the same view of relationships that they have. My experiences have shaped my views a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I get it. I get where the sometimes the media perception comes from. But when my colleagues will, or my brother or whoever, when they think about the kinds of relationships that I had, the kind of relationships that they knew of people from our generation were the ones that are publicized in the media. And so
Yeah.
they do, I must say, honor, and they have honored my relationships pretty well, actually. Like I haven't had any issues with regard to that, but I also once in a while have to correct a misconception. I also run the cinema club. It's called the cinema club, not the movie club. That's important. That's the joke, right?
Ha ha.
Because I have a rule. You can't suggest anything to watch that isn't cinema. And they say, "What's cinema?" And I say, every time you ask the question, we have to have a conversation about it. What is the difference between cinema and a movie? And they hate me by the end of it, but they get it. And I have so many kids who at 16, 17, 18 say their favorite movie is a cartoon that they
Oh,
watched when they were 8 or 9 years old. And what I try to say to them is, even if that's true, maybe deep down you just want to watch, I don't know, whatever, Toy Story.
yeah.
Part of being an adult is recognizing what is for children and what is for adults and trying to read an adult novel, trying to watch an adult movie and trying to comprehend it and wrap your head around complexity and nuance and adult themes and like, oh, so this is what adults get. You want to sort of increase your proximity to adulthood. They don't really feel the impulse to do that.
Mhm.
And I think the queer kids in particular are having an interesting time at it because historically, I mean, they're taught, because I don't know, and every place is a little bit different, but there's some queer history taught in our schools. We talk about queer historical figures and Stonewall is a taught event in history classes and whatnot. And so they kind of know on one level that there is a subcultural component to the LGBT community, but for the life of them, they can't figure out what it is,
Hmm.
because so many things are mainstream and so
Yeah.
many things are normalized. They have a hard time wrapping their head around what subculture is. I am very interested, just as a human being, in subculture,
Hmm.
in just how kind of, for lack of a better word, strange groups coalesce around interesting ideas. And, we were kind of part of the biggest subculture for a really long time, a very big subculture, I should say, not the biggest,
Yeah.
but, and I think we've lost a little bit of our subcultural edge,
Mm,
collectively as a culture. I mean, I think on the fringes, there are still subcultural components, but I mean, we have Pride brought to you by Citibank.
yeah,
That says a lot. Pride
sure.
brought to you by Target.
The
You,
commercialization of everything in America. I
everything.
mean,
Yeah.
it's America. I was going to ask you about your curriculum and if you intentionally incorporate queer literature into your curriculum and if you've ever gotten any parent pushback. I mean, it sounds like the place, wherever you are in New York, is pretty accepting on the whole, but I'm just curious, have you ever gotten any parent pushback and what your curriculum looks like in terms of queer literature?
I mean, so we have a pretty standard canon. So, for example, I mean, the ninth graders are reading Romeo and Juliet. There's not a lot of room there for,
Yawn.
I,
Okay.
to be fair, there's a lot to do with Romeo and Juliet, but
Yeah.
that's the wrong topic for this thing. I do kind of love investigating the like the gender norms and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Why
Yeah.
is Romeo allowed to roam around freely while Juliet's kept locked up? All that kind of stuff. And how there are a lot of pieces of dialogue that suggest perhaps a breakdown of some of those norms, but
Mm.
that's not the right topic. The other course that I teach is a capstone research course, which is kind of the love of my life for the
Mm.
past couple of years. So, very long story short, the College Board created this 2-year capstone program in which the first year students just learn research skills through a series of projects, and in the second year they complete the equivalent of a master's thesis with a presentation and oral defense. And I
Wow.
teach the second year of that program. And the rule is anything is on the table. You can
Hmm.
research anything you want as long as you go through an IRB process and you go through a pitch process and when we talk it through and so I mean I've had kids do, explicitly queer projects. I
Mm.
had a student a couple of years ago critique novels through a queer lens and how they're taught. I had
Oh.
a student do survey research about how young children who watch queer coded Disney characters in movies interpret and understand that coding. And that all that stuff is totally on the table. It's encouraged. My attitude is tear it all down, make them see you, make them hear you, make them notice you, do whatever you want. And very, very encouraging of that. So that's like kind of my outlet for lack of a better word, politics.
Nice.
But even still, every piece of literature ha needs to be looked at through a variety of lenses. And I done the greatest job, candidly, have I done the greatest job reshaping the canon to reflect better reading? No. Part of that is there's actually a really interesting study of English and language arts teachers that suggests that they wind up teaching what they're comfortable with and what they know.
Yeah.
And so I kind of fell into that trap along with many others. And I think I'm good at it. I have materials on it, and so to create a whole new
Yep.
curriculum is a little bit nightmare inducing, given the number of years that I have in and the material that I have.
Right.
I convince myself, and maybe I'm wrong, but I convince myself that by looking at things through a variety of lenses, that I'm offering students an opportunity to explore those questions.
Hmm. When you were talking about the literature you use in your class, I was surprised to hear. I mean, that's the stuff I read when I was in high school.
Well,
And I'm just so surprised to hear it's the same because I would think that there would be different books. I'm shocked that there aren't, that even your curriculum would say incorporate these novels that say maybe were written within the last decade or something, but
I
it
think
doesn't
one
seem
of the
like it.
problems is, and this goes back to what I said before about young people not wanting to wrestle with adult ideas. A lot of what is being, and I'm painting with a very broad brush, and
Okay.
I don't mean to, but a lot of what is being passed off as literature is really kind of YA in disguise.
Yes. Okay.
We've seen the explosion of YA as the biggest genre in all of literature by it's not even close. And that was probably probably began with Harry Potter and then went through Twilight, Hunger Games, and Divergent, and it kind of this thread of where, I mean, you have and I'm not saying that's the only literature being published, but there's so much
Hmm.
that is, for lack of a better word, just it's YA, and it's written in a way that is YA, and it might explore. So one of the things, these are the debates we have among colleagues. There's a question as to do you give them works that are thematically stimulating,
Mm.
or do you give them books that are linguistically, rhetorically stimulating? And
Mm.
how, and those are two completely different avenues. And for example, in 10th grade we read like Elie Wiesel's Night, right, which
Yeah.
is a book that you really can't give it to younger people because it's so horrifying and so traumatizing in terms of its content that you want to wait until someone's a little bit older.
Yeah.
At the same time, I believe the original version was, did he write it in Yiddish or Hebrew? I can't remember, but it was translated to French, then translated to English. Then his
Yeah.
wife went back and retranslated it, and and so the actual language of it
Yeah.
is not that compelling. In fact, there are areas where you
Mm.
go, I'm sure in the original language it's much more poetic and it's much more beautiful, but these translations,
Yeah.
and so then it's a question of, obviously there's great historical and cultural value to reading something like that, but there's not a ton of, for lack of a better term, advancing their skill level,
Yes.
as readers. And so that's the balance. Reading Shakespeare is important because they have to wrestle with syntax in a way that almost nothing else makes them
Yeah.
wrestle with syntax. They
It's
have to
true.
wrestle with double and triple meanings and sort of implication and sound, and that's the sound of writing as opposed to just the meaning of it. All of these pretty challenging concepts, they have to wrestle with them all at the same time. And so I'm less concerned with what it's about, than
Okay.
I am with the grappling with challenging text. Now, am I probably sweeping away tons and tons and tons of challenging text? No question. But I know that in the upper level, more challenging literature classes, they do read Toni Morrison, yeah, and things that are both challenging on a thematic level and beautifully written. It's
Okay.
just 14-year-olds are,
Yeah.
and some of them are 13,
Yeah.
they want to read Holes or something. Or they want and I get it, but it's or The Outsiders.
Fun reads.
Yeah, fun. It's fun, and I have no problem with fun. I read The Hunger Games. It's cute, whatever.
Mm.
But
Hmm.
it's
Okay.
pretending that's you know great literature. And by the way, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian was written in 2006, and so it's funny because when I first picked it, it was new, and now it's like that's 20 years old. That's not even new
Yeah.
anymore. And it's
Yeah.
funny because I'm like, can't you guys relate to this? And they look at me like I'm, two heads, because that's old too. For lack of a better word, that was my DEI book. It's
Okay.
it's written in such a cool way.
Hmm.
It's just so much cool prose in it. There's a lot of accompanying poetry that's really cool, and it's thematically, it talks about, interesting. It's about things that 14-year-olds care about. How do I see myself
Mm.
fitting in a place where I know I don't? It's like a classic fish
Mm.
out of water. And then
Mm.
and I like it for those reasons, but and that's not. There are people who look at me and say that's not high literature. And one of the reasons why I chose that book is because for about 8 years I co-taught an ENL English class. So
Okay.
the class was 50-50 native English speakers and 50% non-native English speakers, and I
Okay.
co-taught it with an ENL teacher, and we needed to bring in a work that was comprehensible in English, but also had a pretty good record of translation into multiple languages, which is one
Hmm.
of it's one of those considerations that unless you're like deep in it, you wouldn't even think that that would be a big deal. But we had to see, is there a version of this in Arabic that we can buy? That was the question that is there a version of this? The Spanish version was easy, the French version was easy, the Arabic version, I found one that cost $60, but
Wow.
that was kind of the consideration sometimes. And truthfully, you know, going into the administrative side of schools, when you do have to take into consideration, you need to be able to buy books that have large print versions, that
That's
have
true.
braille versions available, that have multiple translations. That's also part of working in a New York school. Is I have when I had the NL program, there was one year when I had 8 different languages represented in my room,
Wow.
which was a beautiful thing, but also an
Hmm.
enormously challenging one. Um,
100%.
and so having resources, of Mice and Men is translated into every language and Klingon probably. Um,
Probably.
and so it's easy. It's easy.
Yeah.
easy book to work with. I don't want to make an excuse that, oh, we do what is easy,
Hmm.
but I work in a district that I would say is not terribly resource constrained. We are very we have plenty of resources, but resources are always constrained.
Yeah.
And there's always, if you ask someone to buy you thousands of dollars in books, they're going to say no, find a way to
Right.
make it cheaper. And so
Right.
we all were, we're working within that system.
That makes sense. You are teaching what makes sense. No, just
Trying to.
the common sense books, what the books that you already have. That,
Oh yeah, a lot of it is.
yeah. So it's really interesting to me. So I'm going to presume that because you did not say you got any parent pushback from any of your lessons or anything all these 23 years, that you haven't gotten any parent pushback. And I want to touch on this because I do have a bias. I'm biased against male teachers. I am. And I have always said from the beginning of my career, male teachers have an easier job. You are automatically more respected than female teachers. And even a gay male teacher, I feel, it's my opinion, has more, gosh, what is the word I'm thinking of? You get more respect from parents than a female teacher would. So, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. I'm curious what your experiences have been because I've worked with dozens of men and students respond to male teachers differently. It's very interesting.
There is no question that's true. There is no question. It's definitely true. I see it with all of my colleagues who complain about it to me. Like, you get away with murder, all that stuff. And they're right. And unfortunately, there's no way for me to like wave that away and make that not be the case, you know? So the only thing that I can do in the face of that is just try to be as unapologetically virtuous as I can be, you know? I want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. Like if someone else is going to catch shit for pushing boundaries and I won't, then I'm going to make sure to push that boundary. I'm going to make sure, when I taught
Mhm.
the 11th grade AP class, one of the things that I did that not everyone necessarily might have disagreed with was we spent about a month, a full month, picking apart Martin Luther King's A Letter from Birmingham Jail. Most people will teach that in a week, week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. And so there were some parents who were like, why are you spending so much time on this? It's not even a book. He's not even a famous author. And my response is because this is the most important thing they will read, probably in their lives,
Mm.
certainly this year. Come at me now. And that kind of, and not in that, I was not confrontational, but I am very direct. And I do not ever, ever, ever give an inch on if I believe that I am right and I believe that I am doing the right thing, I just won't give an inch on it when it comes to the well-being of not only the kids that are in front of me, but our society as a whole. And I do think that that is part of what we are charged with. So I do see my women colleagues sometimes having a harder time with parents. In fact, the woman who used to run GSA, who was my lesbian colleague, my co-teacher for all of those years, she did run into a political situation. So she's teaching ENL students, and she was trying to teach them about the two-party system. And so
Mhm.
she created notes that were an oversimplified but correct view at sort of the general political breakdown of the country. This group generally believes X, this other group generally believes Y, with some carve outs for obvious individuality. And again, she's teaching this as part of a culture unit
Mm.
and an intro to politics for students who just moved to this country,
Okay.
who are trying to understand when people throw terms around them. And I thought, because she is such an incredible professional, she was trying to be like hyper professional in her presentation of the different political boundaries. And someone went into her room when she wasn't there, unlocked the door, took a picture of all of her notes, her handouts, and her notes on the board, and posted it on Facebook. And I know it was one of my colleagues because how else would the door have gotten unlocked, right? And
Oh.
so clearly that was an attempt to silence her politically or have some kind of perception that they were silencing her politically. The lesson itself was so necessary and so benign and so uncontroversial that it didn't go anywhere. It was infuriating to me. She had to kind of calm me down basically and say, because I was like, we gotta find who did this. This is ridiculous. And sort of she was more willing to accept that she was going to get pushback and sort of was more accepting of it, whereas
Right.
I kind of flipped out. And so, yeah, I 100% acknowledge that I do not get anywhere near the same challenges that my women colleagues face. I'm very fortunate that I have never really faced any serious pushback early in my career when I had a 10th grade class and I was teaching Lord of the Flies. I had a parent call and complain that the book was too violent. Thankfully, one of the administrators just called them back and dealt with it. It never even made it to me, but I was told after the fact that it happened. But I do hear stories all the time about some of my colleagues who, have their authority and expertise challenged by parents. And
Yep.
one of the things I can do in union leadership is vigorously defend them in such cases. That's kind of the way I can use my resources to the benefit of others.
Nice. Yeah, I was going to ask what you would do to help or what you think can be done to fix the system because I feel like COVID, post-COVID, parents just seem like they're really overstepping these
Yeah.
days.
You're coming from the elementary world, it's even more pronounced and prevalent in that world.
It
So
is.
I've actually heard stories where there are schools that actively seek out male elementary school teachers illegally
Mm,
in order to balance out their schools. In high
right.
school, at least where I am, that's less prevalent. And I've sat on a lot of interviews. It's never been a thing.
Mm.
But I have heard it in the elementary context, and it's scary to hear.
I will say I went to a school campus last week to sub and I was counting, I was watching the teachers and I'm thinking, where are all the men? There was one male teacher on that campus, of course, fifth grade. And because, and I was going to say when you were talking about it, like for high school and middle school teachers, I think more males are drawn to the upper grades. I think that it's very rare. I mean, I've known a handful probably of TK to third grade male teachers back in my 6 year career and as a sub. Very rare to see them. They're very rare. And they mostly will teach fourth, fifth, and sixth grade or middle and high school.
I mean, the education has historically been a job and a career that attracts families. When we really think about it, it's part of the kind of the core of what makes the family, right? The idea is that you are helping to rear and shape a child and local parentis. That's one of the things that a teacher does. And so historically, it's been the way things go that young women are attracted to teaching partly because of the hours and the flexibility of the schedule and the
Mm,
ability to raise a family. Being able to raise a family was one of the main attractors for young women to the profession. And so, for schools to turn around and then be surprised when young women have
right.
children, why do you think they went into this profession? And I will
Good
say
point.
my job has become far more progressive in that, at least where I work on that front. When I first started, there was an administrator who got pregnant when she was untenured,
Mm,
and they let her go. And I
wow.
remember at the time, of course, it wasn't officially because she got pregnant, but we all knew that was the reason why.
Yeah.
And last year, I had two untenured teachers at my school get pregnant, and the school wouldn't even dream of letting them go, or we would
Okay.
eviscerate them. So that's just, there has been this shift towards recognizing that, people who want to have children, they want to have them when they're 25, 26. They don't want to have wait until they're 31, 32,
Right.
30.
Yeah, definitely. Very, very interesting. Well, Sean, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure talking with you today. I really appreciate you sharing all of your insights and wisdom you've gleaned throughout these 23 years. And before we end, would you like to share with everyone what gay thing or things you've been doing are lately?
I haven't even watched Heated Rivalry yet. Okay,
I know,
that's
me
it's
neither.
it's
But
on the list,
yeah,
but we just finished like Bridgerton, so
I've read the book though. I read the first book and I'm on the second one. Have you read them?
I have not.
I get to a point, even with those novels, just thinking to myself, okay, they're having sex again. Like it can even just get to the point where, okay, they're having a lot of sex. Got it. Is there any story? Real
So
good story.
I read a thing, and maybe you could offer insight into this. I read a thing that the primary audience for those books is women.
Straight women,
Yes, and that's like sort of fascinating to me.
I
I don't
know.
that's like I guess a subcultural thing I don't 100% understand.
Hmm.
Um,
It's wild. I know it's not like gay men are lining up at the bookstore to buy those
no.
books.
No, I'm very interested in the way that gay men are perceived to consume culture. So,
Mm.
for example, the gay male consumption, because we do tend to spend a lot more money than our straight counterparts. Gay men that's like we're like considered the profligate spenders in the market. I get an unreal amount of like high dollar advertising for all kinds of stuff that I am not interested in buying. To me, that's the frontier that gay men are being exploited on now
Mm.
is financially is
Interesting.
that's why like those all of this pride brought to you by Chase or something
Yeah.
like, is not an accident. It's all trying to
Yeah.
you know
Sell us
to
shit and yeah,
yeah
get more of our
and
money.
yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. Trying to resist some of that, trying to get myself out of being sold to and get away from the advertising, get away from wasteful spending and wastefulness. It's really hard.
Yeah.
People talk about how like hyper commercialized the gay experience has been. So I've been really trying to be mindful about what I'm being sold. Do I really need to run out and like subscribe to HBO to watch Heated Rivalry or whatever, to be sort of mindful and conscious of the new frontier of, I think, I'm going to boldly say the new frontier of LGBT oppression is
Mm.
in our wallets.
Mm.
So I would really want to try to be mindful of who I'm contributing to and what those contributions look like, and really think of myself as an elder statesman in our community, and hopefully use my experience and wisdom for the forces of good.
Hey, clap, clap to that. I'm all for that too. I know that there's just been so much pushback these last few prides. It's probably been going on for a few years where people
Yeah,
have really been talking about it, just like get Target out of our festivals and basically fuck a lot of these companies, and get them out. But then the organizers are saying, hello, that's how we're making money. And that's how we're putting this whole shindig on. And it's like, well, then we as a community need to come together to get different funding. But it's the easy money bag
absolutely.
for the Pride Festival organizers, right? Just to say, oh, these huge corporations that are actually donating money to interests that harm us, great. We'll take their money because they're offering us a lot of it. But it's so true. Good job, you. Yeah, I'm getting there too myself. It's our money, it's our power. We decide what we do with it.
Very true.
And if you want to dance with me, here comes the outro music.